welcome back to the Quest for Success podcast. We've made it to another episode, and it's great to be here. And if you're watching online, you might notice that I'm not joined by Jam as usual. I'm actually joined by another special guest, and it's a very influential man to me, so I'm very glad that we could have him on the podcast here. This is my granddad from my mum's side, Jim. Grandad, thanks for taking the time to come and talk to us.
It's a pleasure, mate. I'm pleased to be here.
Yeah, so Grandad, I know you don't know a lot about this podcast and what we do here, but the goal is to kind of hear people's stories and understand what success means to different people and the factors which they think contribute to success. And so I want to start out by asking you, probably a very crucial question to this is, what does success mean to you?
Well, mate, I've never really thought about it. I've just lived life and done my best, and whether I've been successful or not is up to other people to judge, I guess.
Yeah, right. And so I suppose, like, would you say it's more about just like being happy and fulfilled for you then?
Oh, yes, of course. If you're happy, well, and you've got a good family that get on well with each other, well, if that doesn't make you happy, you've got problems.
Yeah. I think that's, a very core part of it is being happy and surrounded by people who are, also happy, and that provides that kind of fulfillment. And I don't know, maybe for you, it's like having built a family that's happy. Would you define that as success?
I'd say I probably would. When all the family get on and the grandchildren get on with each other, it's success in my eyes. It's really, money doesn't come into it. You can have a lot of money and still not be happy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's, especially nowadays, maybe that's something that's being missed, is everyone's chasing the money, but maybe at the end of the day, it's all about the fulfillment and the people that you spend your time with.
Well, I certainly agree with that, yes.
All right, so I want to take a step back and go, because you've always got a lot of stories for me, and I want to kind of go back to the early days. And I know we could probably talk about it for hours, but I want to start with your upbringing. You grew up in Cronulla with an immigrant parent.
Yeah, well, it was near Cronulla.
Yeah. And so how do you think, looking back now, how do you think your early upbringing kind of shaped your journey and who you are today?
I would say it had a lot to do with it, because your parents sort of set the example, and your grandparents, and you just sort of follow that family tradition as you grow older.
Yeah. And what was it that your parents did?
Well, they looked after me, they worked hard and taught me things, and as I grew older, that was one of the big influences on my life. Yeah.
And what specifically job did your father have?
Well, he came from Ireland.
Yeah.
And he was a fitter and turner. And he worked at a place called the Glass Works for a long, long time. I remember that. And he loved to go fishing. And I used to go with him sometimes, and then as I grew older, I used to go with my mates. But he still went on his own, on his time off, and we both loved fishing.
Oh, that's good. And do you think, seeing him as, would you say that you saw him as like an idol and someone that you like wanted to be like when you grew up?
I'd say basically yes, but he was a very quiet person, and when he was young, the war, well, I don't know if you call it a civil war, but they were fighting over there, the IRA, and he had pretty, well, bad or horrific upbringing because he lived in an area where there was a lot of fighting, but he didn't talk about it much.
Yeah.
It was only later on in life that you find out about these things. So that influenced things a lot.
Yeah.
Especially with him. But I had a lot of uncles and aunties, and I used to visit them, and we had good times together. And that sort of sets the example of how you're going to be later on in life.
Yeah. So like having that close family network.
Yeah.
Is something that you probably like wanted to replicate.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like when you were young, go back to those days. What did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, I never really thought about it because I was having too good a time when I was young. But I had a couple of uncles who were in the construction building industry, and I just said, oh, well, I want to be a carpenter like them.
Yeah.
And that's what I finished up doing.
Yeah, it was something we were talking about in our last episode, where it's like when you surround yourself with you're basically the average of the people you surround yourself with. So maybe, you know, being surrounded by your uncles who are all carpenters, or, you know, especially heavily influenced by the trades. Do you think that was one of the reasons that you kind of went down that career path?
Oh, I'd say so, yeah.
Yeah. And
yeah.
And so I know something that always shocked me when you would always tell your stories was you kind of started work at a very young age. I think it was around 14.
Yeah.
And for me, you know, hearing that was so crazy because now that's not a very common thing, just kind of going off on your own limb and starting your trade that young. I don't know. For me, I want to know like what sparked that. Was that a normal thing at the time for kids that age to go off and start their apprenticeships? And
well, it was. Well, at most it was 15 when they left because you'd done the intermediate certificate and the leaving certificate 2 years later if you wanted to, but a lot of us left after the intermediate certificate, and you could go and get a trade or be an apprentice, and a lot of people got jobs in the post office, being telegram boys and things like that, and there was quite a lot of work around for like kids that age then.
Yeah. And for me, that's so crazy. And like when you said you like went to TAFE, or tech, whatever it was back then, were you out of home or were you still at home?
No, I was still at home, and we used to go to tech, and the boss would pay for us to go.
Yeah.
And later on, I kept going to tech, and I was going 4 nights a week and some Saturdays as well, which took up a fair bit of your time.
Yeah.
Especially when you're going to work as well.
Yeah. And in doing that, do you think, like for me at 14, I was like nowhere near ready to go off and kind of do that. Like, do you think going off at such a young age or starting at such a young age, like made you grow up quicker than maybe nowadays?
Well, I probably would say so, because when I first started, I had to catch the train, and then I could either catch a bus or walk from the station to where I was working in a joinery shop. So you learnt different things at a younger age, I'd say.
Yeah. And did you have any mentors or influential people like at that time? Because I feel like, as I said, I wouldn't really know what to do. So was there people who were kind of guiding you along the way, or was it something you kind of just figured out as you went?
Well, it was a bit of both, I suppose. Like there was quite a few apprentices working. It was in a joinery shop, and then there was the tradesmen who worked there as well, and there was our families, and I'd say they all played a part.
Yeah. And then, so after you finished tech and did you continue on in your apprenticeship and then go on to be a fully fledged carpenter? How does that work?
Well, you'd done 5 years then.
Yeah.
Which I did, and then there was another course we had to go to tech for 4, and you could do another course that went for 3. And I said, well, I'll do this course. And I'd done 2 years, and a friend and myself decided to go and work in the country. And I said, well, I'll do that when I come back. And I'm still waiting to do it. So I never done the 3rd year.
Oh, that's great. And so when you went off to the country, what was this job that you were chasing? Or was it just you wanted to get out of where you'd been living? And like what spurred you to do that?
Well, it was mostly financial.
Yeah.
There was a lot of money in those days. And when we got the job, we were putting more money in the bank every week than what we were making working in Sydney. So it was quite good.
And where did you end up?
I ended up at a little place called North Star.
Ah, North Star. And so I know the story here, but for the other people listening who don't know, what ended up happening in North Star, Grandad?
Well, I met this country girl. I went up there to make my fortune and finished up getting married up there.
And how big is North Star? It's a pretty small town, isn't it?
Well, I'd suppose there'd be about, I'd say, last time we were there, I don't know, 10 or 12 houses. Well, when I went there was no hotel, and most country towns have a hotel, but there wasn't one in North Star.
That's crazy. And do you ever, or have you ever stopped and kind of looked back at that and kind of just thought how crazy it is that you ended up there? And like, it's almost like destiny, right? The little things that happen, consider what would have happened if you didn't chase that job to North Star. You ended up in a different town, and like how different your life story could have been from that.
Well, that's for sure, because the company that I work for were building 2 silos in 2 separate towns, and I could have been sent to the other one and wouldn't have even heard about North Star. So,
and then I wouldn't be here either.
Well, that's very true, mate. So
everything happens for a reason, hey?
Is it destiny, or is it just one of those things?
Yeah, that's amazing. And then after North Star, where did you go? Did you and Nana kind of travel around and follow jobs, or how did it go?
Well, this mate and myself, we went to a couple of more jobs, and then I went back to North Star and I stayed there and done all sorts of jobs that hadn't really happened to me before, but that's life, and I don't regret the experience, working on farms and different things. And now I can say, well, I used to work 60 hours a week, 6 10-hour days for $60 a week, not an hour.
It's a far cry from what it is now, isn't it?
Well, mate, it's a bit different these days.
And do you think, like, I don't know, I feel like I'm at the point where I'm kind of trialing a lot of different jobs. I was doing engineering, now I'm working on my own business. Do you think you look back on that experience, like, doing construction for a little while, doing some farm jobs? I know you've done a lot of different jobs. Do you look back on that kind of fondly as, getting to do a lot of different things and try your hand. Because for me, I think that's a really important step, kind of experimenting, and it kind of keeps the enjoyment in life, always changing it up and doing different things. Is that the same for you or not?
Well, put it this way, mate. I certainly don't regret anything that's happened in basically any period of my life. There are things that well, everyone's got them, but around that time, well, no, I just put it down to experience, and I don't regret it at all.
Yeah, that's so cool. And so we're recording this now in Umina on the Central Coast. How did you end up here?
Well, I came here working with a company that mostly built bridges, and around here there's a bridge called the Rip Bridge, and I came here to work on that. And we just decided that this would be a good place to live. So we're still here.
And was there anything that made you make that decision? Was there anything super clear that stood out about here, or was it just kind of the right time and in your life that you thought here's the place to settle down?
Well, houses were a lot cheaper. It was close to the beach where I'd lived in my young days. I'd always been close to the salt water, and we just decided we'll settle here for a while anyway. And the company I work for didn't basically have any bridges in New South Wales. They had work in Canberra, but there was no accommodation in Canberra. So we stayed here. And we're still here.
What is it, 40 years later, still here?
Oh, mate, it'd be about getting close to 55, I'd say.
Oh, really? That long?
Well, be over 50, yeah.
And have you ever thought about going somewhere else? Or is this now, you've been here for so long that this is the place?
No, we were going to, when I stopped work, we said we'll move up the coast further. And then our children started to get married and babies were coming along, and we just thought, well, we'll never see these grandkids if we move up there, so we stayed here and we see them.
Yeah, well, I remember, probably the first 11 or 12 years of my life, I think I spent morning and afternoon here.
And Nana still talks about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I definitely, looking back, have definitely been shaped by, my time here. And I think it goes back to a lot of what you said, like the family connections.
Oh, yeah, I fully agree, mate. Yeah.
And, we have a very close-knit family, and I think that's definitely shaped who I am. So I'm very appreciative of that. But going back to, your working life, are there any other standout moments that you think were really big turning points? Like, if you hadn't have made that decision, you would have ended up on a totally different path.
Well, not really, because in those days, work, as I used to say, is like playing football. You're only as good as your last game. And when one job finished up here, that company probably would never do another one, so you had to go and see another company about getting a job, and you would say, well, talk to the people I work for last, and they would either say yes or no, and so you had to do your best all the time, basically.
Yeah. And so we were talking about, how you kind of created your family environment here in the Central Coast. And, you were doing quite long hours as well at work. I know you worked very hard. So how did you find that balance between, working hard at work and then also managing to spend quality time with your family?
Well, mate, it's like this. When you've got 4 children and a wife who doesn't work, if the work's there, you do it. And then when it's not there, you can't do it. So when it was there, I used to do it. And that's the way it was. And of course, most jobs then, I don't know about now, used to work 6 days a week and sometimes longer. So I'd be there. But as far as the family, well, I think Nana deserves a lot of credit because she was the one at home looking after everybody. And I think the children and myself really appreciate that as well.
Yeah. And was that something that you kind of agreed upon early, or was it kind of just the way back then, and also because, you were the one working and Nana wasn't?
Well, that's just the way it sort of worked out. Like some jobs I'd only work 5 days a week. Well, when the children were young and they'd play tennis, I'd be driving them all over the Central Coast because they're in the competition, and Steve used to play soccer, but then if I was working, we'd have to rely on someone else, and that's the way it was.
Yeah. And do you think it was like a lot more community back then? Like you could rely on other people in your area or network to kind of fill the gaps when you couldn't?
Well, mates, people talk to each other in those days instead of sending messages on their phone. So I think it was a different type of life, yeah.
And I suppose that's a good segue into something else that I wanted to ask you. It's like, you've experienced a lot and you have a unique perspective where, you've got to see Australia change through a lot of different generations and advancements. Are there anything that you think we've kind of gone backwards in, or any like big changes that you think are very critical?
Well, I think children these days spend far too much time looking at the little screen, and I will say a lot of them do play sport, but then a lot of them don't play sport, or they don't basically do anything, which to me is sad. And that, when our kids were young, well, every afternoon they'd be out playing, but these days it seems to be a different story.
And do you think, like, what impact do you think that will have going forward?
Well, now they're saying younger people can't see long distances because they've been looking at the little screen too much. And I think that's just the start of it. And there's a lot more takeaway food, and you see kids these days going to school with soft drinks and things like that. Well, our kids might have that once a week or something, but these days, if it doesn't happen every day, there's something wrong. And things have certainly changed.
Yeah. And I feel like even I've noticed it in like social interactions as well, because you're so used to interacting on a screen or via message, you don't kind of learn those social cues that you would have in like a normal conversation. And so like I feel like a lot of the next generation, like even myself included, are becoming like a lot more introverted because we haven't had that exposure to kind of talking to people, just like random people in the street. Like to me, that's one of my worst nightmares, is going up to just some random person and asking for help doing something. But then I know when I'm out with you and, we need directions or something on a road trip, you'll just wind the window down and ask any old person in the street, where do I go from here? And I feel like that's something that's changed as well. Just
Well,
the ability to interact with people.
I fully agree, mate. Like these days, your phone just about tells you everything you want to know, and you don't have to talk to anyone to find out things. So that's what people do. It's all on the phone, and I haven't got one, so I have to ask people if I want to know things.
And I almost envy you sometimes not having a phone, because I feel like the problem with our devices now is it makes us over connected. So now it's like when you knock off work, I'm sure for you, when you knocked off work, that was it, right? But now it's if I knock off work, oh, I'm getting an email at 5:30. I'm getting an email at 6 p.m. Like it's like I'm constantly being bombarded. No matter if I'm not at work, it doesn't matter because we're so connected. I'm constantly getting notifications and things outside of work time.
Well, mate, when I walked out the gate, it was all over until I walked in the next morning. And that's the way it was. You just, when you're knocked off, you're knocked off. And you went and done the rest of your life, until you started back the next day.
Yeah. And I feel like that's the way it should be. And I think there's a lot of legislation that's being trying to get pushed through to try and make it more like that. But I think right now it's very much you're kind of always on the clock, essentially. Even if, the emails can wait till the next day. When you get your phone goes off, you're always you're wired to go and check it now. And I feel like that's causing this problem that I was kind of trying to delve into between this difference between work and life. And that's kind of why I asked about how you balanced family and work, because I feel like nowadays it's a lot more challenging because we're so connected.
Oh, I fully agree. Yeah, it's just, well, to me, the phone basically controls people's lives and they just can't put it down no matter where they are. Even if they're falling down a hole, they're still looking at their phone. So you just wonder what it's all about. And you think, well, I can live without that. And I know they have their benefits, but I don't know whether it's worth it.
Yeah. No, I agree. I definitely agree. There's some days I wish I didn't have one, but this is like a bit more of a deep question. And so you can take time to think about it. But I want to know if there's anything across your life, even if it's a small thing, that you regret. You look back and maybe think you made the wrong decision, whether it's just, life in general, work or financial, and you wish that you had have done something different.
Mate, well, I'm sure there are things I could have done differently, but when I go to bed at night, I don't lay there and have one particular thing on my mind 2 or 3 nights a week that happened 20 years ago saying, why didn't I do that or why did I do it? But, mate, life's life and I've just taken it as it comes and I've got no major regrets about anything, really. There's always things that you could have done differently, but there's nothing I would say major. There's probably a few or minor things, but major, not, as I said, that keeps me awake at night or anything like that. So,
and do you think that's something important, is to kind of not let regret hang over your shoulder? Do you think that's an important part of life?
Oh, I do. It's happened, and what's happened, mate, and it doesn't matter what you do, it's not going to change, is it? So whatever it was, good or bad, well, it's there, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, kind of just learn from it and take it into the next one. And
Well, if it's bad, try and make sure it doesn't happen again. But if it's good, keep doing it.
yeah. And on the flip side of that, now, 81? 80?
Yeah.
You've had a lot of experiences and, done a lot of things. What are the few things, or what's the standout thing that you're most proud of?
Well, I suppose the most important thing would be getting married and having children and bringing them up. That's everything else. Well, so's that. It's just part of life. It's just comes along, mate, and you take it as it comes, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad, and you try and work it out. And that's what I've done. But I'd say that would probably be... There's other things that have happened that you say, oh yeah, but I'd say getting married was probably one of the top thing, and just going on with life from there.
What about career-wise? Is there anything that you look back on that you're really proud of?
Well, I've worked for quite a few different companies, and I never, because in those days you would ask for a reference when the job finished, and no one ever said we're not going to give you one, or wrote one out that would be detrimental to getting another job with someone else. They were always in my favour about getting another job, and I'm quite happy about that. And I used to get on well with all the boys I worked with, and a couple of girls in those days, but I can't think of anything major that shouldn't have happened or should have. I'm just quite happy with the way things panned out.
Yeah. And other than Nana, are there any friendships that have lasted a really long portion of your life, or are there any friends that you're still in touch with?
Well, around here there's the odd one.
Yeah.
But most, a lot of people you just don't come into contact with anymore. I don't know why, but of course a lot of us are getting on a bit, and a lot have died, and a lot of, they've moved. A lot of people have moved to different areas, and it's just the way life is. You work on a lot of jobs and meet a lot of people, and could write a book about each job just about, but that's the way it is.
Yeah, well, for me, it's now that we're so connected, I feel like that happens less. When you have friends and they move off somewhere else, you always kind of have a vague idea of what's happening in their life. You see pictures or whatever. But for me, that's always a bit of a struggle of kind of letting friends go, if that makes sense. It's kind of as you finish a job and everyone moves off and goes on to their next thing. But, for me, it's when you finish school or finish university and everyone goes their own ways.
Yeah.
How do you, is there a way to just kind of let people go? I don't know.
See, up here, there was a group who mostly worked on big jobs, and people couldn't drive up here from Sydney or drive down from Newcastle every day. If they wanted to work on the Central Coast, they had to stay here, basically. But these days, they can drive up here to work, or people up here can drive to Sydney to work. So it's a completely different setup these days. And if you didn't meet people on this big job, you'd probably meet them on the next big one. There was just a group of people who mostly worked on the bigger jobs, and we all got to know each other.
Yeah, so it wasn't goodbye, it was kind of see you later, see you on the next one.
See you on the next one or the one after that. Because most of the trades, there was just 3 or 4 at the most of each trade who could cope with doing like the bigger jobs. They had the men and they had the experience. So, and being locals, they could compete against outsiders.
Yeah.
So we were one big happy family.
The travelling roadshow of tradies.
Yes. Build anything.
So I want to kind of link this back to the first question I asked you about your definition of success. And you kind of touched on, being happy, being fulfilled, and having a good family. So now looking back, would you say that you're successful? Do you feel successful?
Well, yeah, I feel quite happy with the way my life has panned out. I suppose it all depends on how you want to look at life.
But for you personally?
Well, I'm quite happy with the way I'm living at the moment. Like, we've done a fair bit of travelling and all that sort of thing, and we can go and see our grandkids and kids and all that, and they come here and stay, and I'm quite happy with life at the moment anyway.
Yeah.
And we're both healthy, which is probably the main thing. So
yeah, definitely.
That counts for a lot.
Absolutely. And is there anything that you still want to do? Like, still want to achieve, or is there anywhere you want to go, or is there anything still left on the list for Grandad?
Not really, mate. Like, you can always do something, but there's nothing I would say, well, I'm going to do this one way or another before I can't do it.
Yeah.
It's just, we'll probably do a few more things, but there's nothing that's really critical that we do. As I said, we've travelled a bit and we're quite happy at the moment. So
now just enjoying the fruits of your labour.
Well, I suppose that's what it boils down to. Yeah, you just get in there and do it while it's there, and hopefully get the benefits when you're our age.
Yeah. And so I want to kind of summarise some of the key things to your success. So I'd say it's probably your hard work ethic, and as you said, when there was work, you'd go and work, and then when there wasn't, you would be spending time with family. Mm-hmm. And so like managing that work-life balance. And then also kind of just, I don't know how to kind of phrase it, kind of just going where life takes you, almost like a freeness. You kind of just followed. Would you agree with that?
Well, mate, I would say yes. Like, when I went to North Star, I finished up working on farms, carting bags of wheat to the wheat shed, and doing all sorts of things that I never dreamed I would ever do.
Yeah.
But I don't regret 1 minute of it. It was all part of life, and as I said, I don't regret any. It was just part of life, and it was, to me, it was good. It was an experience, and you can say, well, I've done this and I've done that, and as I said, it was good.
Yeah, and I think that's like one of the, like maybe the secret ingredients, because I know for me, I definitely overanalyze decisions. Like when, should I take this job, or what will happen if I do that? And I kind of think into it too much. But it seems like you kind of just went with the flow.
Well, mate, some of the farmers or managers would come in to where my wife and the mother worked at the co-op, and they would just say, I'm looking for a tractor driver, or I'm looking for this or that, and all depends on what I was doing at the time. But if I was just about finished there, I'd say, well, I can do that, and off I'd go.
Yeah, and I think that's something very special. Just like being able to go with the flow like that, and not really like overanalyze too much. Because I feel like now we're in a world that overanalyzing is very prominent. And so I think that ability to just, know that you're on the right path and just roll with it.
Well, that's true. Like, even if I had never done it before, I'd say, well, what am I supposed to do? And if they didn't want to show me, well, I didn't do the job. And that's the way it was. And as long as I was working, doing something, well, I was happy.
Yeah. And so maybe that's the other one, like being agile and being able to adapt to different situations. You lived in a lot of different places, done a lot of different jobs, being able to adapt to wherever you are and make do for you and your family.
Well, mate, at one stage I was working in Moree, which is about, 60 miles, whatever that is, about 90 k's, I suppose, from North Star. And I used to go in there and work 6 days and then go back to North Star. And I used to sleep in my car. Well, it was a station wagon, and I used to sleep in it. Just drive out, I don't know what it was, whether it was a bit of a national park or what, but I used to drive out to this place every night and go to sleep there. But that was just one of those things that you done.
Yeah, you do what you have to do.
Yeah, and it saved me money. Yeah. So,
are there any others, so other than those three, like working hard and family, and then kind of going where the wind takes you and being agile and easy to adapt to different situations? Are there anything else that you think is core to your success or where you've gotten to?
Well, mate, if I had a one Powerball or Lotto, it probably would have been a different story, but so far it hasn't happened, unfortunately. Yeah. Whether that's for the good or the bad, who knows?
And I think maybe also just your positive outlook on everything, I think would be something I would add. Always very happy and looking at the brighter side of things, which probably makes life more enjoyable because you're not always just focusing on the negative things that are happening. You get to have joy in the little things in life. Well,
mate, it's like I say, when you open your eyes of a morning, you're halfway there, which is a big help.
Absolutely. And so I guess, is there anything else, any other words of wisdom you'd like to end on, Grandad?
Well,
any advice for the young folk?
Well, I'm afraid the young folk these days are completely different to the young folk in our day, but that's life, and that's how things change, and they just change with everything. And you can sit here and criticise and say this and that, but that's the way life is for them today. So whether it's for the better or the worse, time will tell, I guess. It's not up to me to like say what they're doing's right or wrong. It's just the way life is, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose on that note, Grandad, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you very much for being very open and vulnerable and letting us into your story. It was very fascinating, and I know there's so many other stories that we could have talked about today, but we'll stick with this. And I definitely am very appreciative of the things that you've done, because it's definitely built the foundations for me and the family that I've grown up in. And definitely spending a lot of time here. I would say that I idolized you and got a lot of things from you that I've implemented into my life. So it's been very special to sit down and chat with you today. So I appreciate that a lot. And thank you everyone for listening. We hope you enjoyed this conversation just as much as we did. You can follow the journey on Instagram at The Quest for Success Pod, or follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Until next week, we'll catch you later. Thank you.